Hey, what's up, Mike?
Here we are. Wow,
Here
we're
we are. We are truly living undeterred. For those of you just joining us, my name is Jeff Johnston. I'm the host of the Living Undeterred podcast, and we have been battling for the last half hour trying to get this thing up and running. And this is coming from a guy who has his project named Living Undeterred, and another man that goes by Antarctic Mike. So if we can't figure this out, Mike, we have problems, man. We have problems. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me as your guest.
This is gonna be fun. I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about.
Cool.
I feel like you're. I tell people I met you on LinkedIn, and I feel like I've known you since high school. Like you and I were high school basketball players or something, or hung out together because we just got off. Our stories meshed so well, and we just really felt comfortable being vulnerable to each other. And
Well, I mean, since this whole virus thing started, right? This has been the way a lot of people obviously have had conferences, have had calls, have had whatever, sales calls, employee
right,
calls, and I think met people. I mean, you and I met through one of these things.
right.
And there are a number of people. In fact, I just sent a message to a guy in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania named Chad Harvey. Chad's another guy I met online like sometime last year. And I said, we ought to get on Zoom because I feel like I've known you for 300 years. It's like, and that's kind of how you and I are. I feel like I've known you for half of my lifetime. And we still have yet to meet in person. And that will, of course, happen in the month of June. But
Yep.
we haven't met in person yet. But yet I feel like when I meet you in person, I feel like, oh, I've kind of known this guy for like since 1972,
Yeah. It's just crazy because, social media gets a lot of criticisms and well earned and well deserved. But the reality is the velocity of information and how we can meet people so quickly now.
Oh, I
And
love it.
just since I started the Living Undeterred project, which is now,
Sure.
I think we're in month 7 or something, or 6. Just the number of people I've met that I never would have met, you included,
Exactly.
that is due to this project that I'm really working on trying to dial down and trying to help myself and also help other people that are struggling with these issues. So before we get going, I have a quick question for you. Why aren't you like called Phoenix Mike or Cabo San Lucas Mike? Why the heck Antarctic, out of all the places in the world, you
Why
picked
not?
the
Why not?
most
Why not
inhospitable?
San Diego, right? Which is where
Yeah,
I
exactly.
live, right?
Exactly. Why Antarctic?
Well, the short answer to the question is I ran into a book about an Antarctic expedition that went completely awry. I ran into this story by random chance in a bookstore in August of 2001. And I fell in love with the story because what I fell in love with was the character of the people.
Right.
In other words, the question I ask myself is, why would somebody intentionally, voluntarily, and willingly go into conditions that were somewhere between difficult and dangerous? This was kind of the ends of the spectrum that I pictured in my head. Why would somebody do that? And I thought to myself, the creativity, the character, and the courage that it takes to try things that nobody else has ever tried that are somewhere between difficult and dangerous is extraordinary, and it's magnetic. So I was instantly drawn to the character of the people. So really the whole attraction to this cold weather stuff really doesn't have anything to do with temperature. It really doesn't have anything to do with having a few screws loose in my head, which I'm sure I did, and I'm sure I still do and always will. But the reality is, it was really by design attracted to character of people that were willing to try these kinds of things. That was really the issue.
Tell me about Ernest Shackleton. I've heard of him. Obviously, in high school and college and different classes we had, we studied great leaders, and Shackleton is one of these people that I know. I know he's on your Mount Rushmore when it comes to great leaders. But
He is.
what
In fact,
what was the attraction?
I'll show you something special. I will tell you about this character. This is a book called Antarctic Days. This is an original first edition from 1913.
Oh, wow.
And It's signed by Ernest Shackleton and 2 of the members of his team.
Come on.
Those are original signatures. Yeah.
Where did you get that?
I bought it from a book dealer in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Wow.
Many moons ago. But this guy grew up in Ireland and basically lived his whole life at sea. He quit school at a very early age because he figured out very early on he was not an academic. He was an adventurous kind of a kid that wanted to see the world and make things happen. Mm-hmm. So he basically ended up on cargo ships that would end up sailing around South America and Africa and all over the world. And that's kind of where he got his taste of adventure at sea. And then when it came to the turn of the century in 1900, he was born in 1874. So now around 1900, he would be about 25. England sort of was the first nation in the world to say, you know what? We want to be the first to put somebody at the South Pole. Mm-hmm. This kind of became the quest of the country. And so they put together a team of people that was really the first serious attempt to get to the South Pole in 1902.
Oh, wow.
That expedition was led by a guy named Robert Scott. And Ernest Shackleton was a crew member on that particular team. And that expedition, they got to Antarctica. And when you get to Antarctica, you have to go about between 700 and 800 miles to get from the edge of the continent to the pole. And the pole is roughly in the geographic center of the continent. And so this particular expedition, they only got about 200 of the 800 miles into the interior before they had to turn around and come back for safety reasons. So they didn't make it, but at least they all came home alive. Then in 1907, Shackleton launched his own expedition. And again, nobody had been to the pole yet. And so Shackleton's goal was to be the first to get to the pole. Well, they got within about 97 miles of the pole when Shackleton determined they had to turn around and come back immediately because the supply of food and fuel was starting to run thin. Now, it was not a question of, do we have enough to get there? The question was, do we have enough to get there and get back safely?
Get back,
right? Because it's not like there's a private Gulfstream plane sitting there waiting to take them back.
Right.
So he was, and this was a character statement about Shackleton, because Shackleton really cared more about the well-being, not just of himself, but his crew members, more than he cared about the fame, the money, the glory, the honor of being the first to the pole. And that's something that was very uncommon in this segment of history. Many people died. You know, it's sort of like these guys that climb Mount Everest. We're going to get to the top at all costs. And they go and they go and they go until their demise, right?
Right.
And so Shackleton had a little bit more of a level head. And so they turned around and they came home. Then what happened in 1911 and 1912, 2 of Shackleton's competitors, that Robert Scott, who was the guy Shackleton originally worked for, was racing against a Norwegian named Amundsen. And so picture both teams on parallel tracks racing simultaneously to the pole, like a triangle. So where my fingers intersect would be where the South Pole is. So they were racing on these 2 parallel tracks. And what happened was the Norwegians won the race and they all got back safely. The British team not only lost the race, but Robert Scott and his 4 crew members died on the return journey. It's a moving story. We'll save that for a different day because there's a whole host of lessons out of that. But so nonetheless, both of those particular teams ended up getting to the South Pole. So then we come back to Shackleton. So in 1914, Shackleton says, okay, congratulations. You 2 guys were the first to get to the pole. I am now launching what he called the last great journey on Earth. This is how he called it. It was called the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, the last great journey on Earth. And his goal was to get to the pole and through it all the way to the other side. Wow. So this is like doubling down and going all in. So this was a really big bet. And that was the expedition when they got stranded down there for 2 years. They never even made landfall. And they got stranded for 2 years, and all 28 of those people came home alive. I mean, it is absolutely a miracle of a story in terms of how did he mentally and emotionally keep 27 people engaged and moving forward when all the circumstances were dire at best? I mean, there's so many questions out of that easily parallel into what all of us do for a living every day in the real world.
I mean, it sounds like you should write a book about this, Mike. Hey, wait a minute. I just happen to have your book in front of me. Now, this is your book, and I think it came out in 2016. Is that right? Or 15?
Yep.
And it's called Leading at 90 Below Zero, Extreme Conditions, Extraordinary Results. And I've read it, and what you just got done talking about for about 9 minutes there encompasses a big block of your book. And I tell you, this is a really good book, Mike, because I'll plead ignorance here. I knew nothing about Ernest Shackleton other than maybe he would have been a multiple choice answer on I would have no idea about the history. But you are so passionate about his story and making sure that the legacy continues. But more importantly, the metaphors that you have brought to the business world, to leaders, I can use this in just a family environment,
totally.
Making sure that the people in the family that have the certain responsibilities feel like they're part of a team and not being bossed around and told what to do. And there's so many really neat, and I've got things marked and highlighted, and I plan on going back and kind of circling back and getting some good information out here. But I suggest,
I'm sure, like, for example, I'm sure your son, Ian, who plays golf, I am sure there are lessons in Shackleton's story from his life that would help him be a better golfer. I'm totally convinced of that, whether it's high school kids, professionals, business people, soccer moms, second graders, it doesn't matter.
I mean, just the like I mentioned about being a great leader is how people will follow you, as they say, into the fire. They'll do whatever needs to be done. And you write about Shackleton's group and the sacrifices they had to make. There's a chapter in your book where they talk about sacrificing their own dogs. I mean, what a sacrifice. I have 3 pets, and I can't imagine, having to put my animals down. But if it came down to me eating or them eating, I guess that's an easy decision, right? In the context.
Well, I think easy here, Monday morning quarterbacking.
There you go.
You're right, in the real world.
Yeah.
I think in the real environment, a very difficult decision, right?
Gotcha.
And the reason I tell that story is because it highlights the importance of making a difficult decision.
Yeah.
And, sometimes the difficult decisions, emotionally, they're not very easy for people to make. I mean, if they were, we wouldn't have to talk about it, right? And I talk about this, and one of the questions I ask CEOs is, I want you to think about the hardest decision you have to make right now that you haven't yet made. What is that decision? And I get people in my sessions with them, I get them to write down the specifics. I mean, I say, look, I want names, addresses, credit card numbers, passport numbers. Like, I want that degree of specifics in the commitment you're going to make in terms of the decision that you have to make. Because if they don't make these decisions, the consequences are sometimes fatal, right? They can be. And so that decision that Shackleton made, that was a very difficult decision. But yet, when you think about it, every decision he makes, he has to think about the impact on all the people because he's responsible for the whole crew. Therefore, he has to think about the impact not only of every decision he makes, but indecision, right? Because not making a decision is making a decision. And so you have to really think about these things. And this is very hard for CEOs to do today.
So how'd you go from being, attached to this story to being one of the first 9 people to run the first Antarctic ice marathon in 2000? I mean, how do you make that leap a lot of people hear compelling stories, Mike, but they don't go train in a freezer for a year or however long you had to train. Was it 2 years? I don't know. It was a long time. But how do you make that leap?
Well, it was let me think of the math here. 2001 is when I ran into the story. It was a 9-year leap. So these things don't happen overnight, right? In 2001, when I first ran into this story, right, my first exposure to the whole subject, that's when I said to myself, okay, this is how my company's leadership course is now going to get taught. I was working as an employee for a big publicly traded company based out of Houston, Texas. And my responsibility was to build a recruiting program for our sales managers, about half the United States. And I mean, these people they were terrible at best on a good day. They just didn't know what they were doing. So they needed help. Well, one of the things I discovered was a big part of about the employee problem was not just hiring people, but keeping them. And so one of the things I discovered when I understood Shackleton's story was there are lessons in here for leaders on how to keep people on a team engaged in moving forward. Well, that was a big part of what was not happening in my company. And so that's when I said, okay, I'm going to write a course for leading and engaging employees based on Shackleton's story. So I literally wrote a course and I used the pictures from Shackleton's story. I went out and I spent $40 of my boss's own money on a book. And I cut out all the pictures and I scanned them and I put them in order and I told the story. And it became a smashing hit within my own company. And that's when I said, okay, I have something special here. In fact, when it really cemented in my mind, the very last presentation I ever did for my company was at a management conference in Indianapolis. In fact, we were at the Marriott Hotel at the Keystone of the Crossing, which is on the north side of Indianapolis. I remember, I can still picture this. And now it's the end of the week. It's a 5-day class. And so at the end of the 5th day, we have an exercise where we kind of go around the room and everybody gets to comment on the highlight of the week. I'll never forget this one guy's comment. As I stand here today in 2021, I'm picturing this. The guy was sitting right about 10 o'clock to me. And he stands up and he says, I don't even know where the hell Antarctica is, but I'm going. And I thought to myself, I got him, right? Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I knew there was something special here. That's when I said, okay, I have to get out of the corporate world and I have to do this on my own.
Right.
But the problem was I didn't have any credibility. And so a friend of mine suggested that I go to Antarctica and run this marathon. And in fact, I called this guy. It was a funny story. I get referred to a guy by the name of Greg Godek. I have no idea who this guy is. Somebody gave me his name and his phone number. Apparently, he wrote a book and he was a speaker and he was on the Oprah Winfrey show. So I figured, okay, he's got to have credibility. Right. So I called this guy up. I'm a complete stranger. And this was in February of 2005. I can still picture the phone call. I was sitting in the parking lot at Starbucks at Claremont Mesa Boulevard in the 805 in San Diego. I was sitting in my gold-colored 1994 Volvo Turbo, 940 Turbo. I can still picture this. So I call this guy up and I said, hi, my name is Mike. I know you don't know me, but Marcia Snow referred me. And we get onto this phone call. And Greg says, you have about 10 minutes. We were on the phone for an hour. And at the end of the hour, he was so fascinated by my fascination with Antarctica and Shackleton. He says to me, well, have you ever been there? And I'm like, what do you mean have I ever been there? I'm sure it's far away. It's expensive and Delta doesn't fly there. Like, that's my favorite airline. And Greg, and I said to him, well, Greg, he says, Mike, you have to go.
Right.
If you don't go, you don't have any credibility. And I said, well, Greg, little did you know that next year, meaning 2006, for the first time ever, there's going to be a marathon run on an ice shelf located 600 miles from the South Pole. His response to me, you're in.
You're in, yeah.
I'm like, well, hold on a minute here. Let's define you're in, right? I mean, I haven't run a marathon in 20 years. What am I going to eat? What am I going to wear? How am I going to train for this? I live in a place called San Diego, California, right? So Greg says, okay, look, you got to go. You'll figure it out, right? Okay, so I commit. I'm in. Now I'm driving home and I'm thinking to myself,
what have I done?
How am I going to get the whole, what's Angela going to think about this, right? So I remember I walk in the front door and I'm like, okay, we have to talk. You're going to do what? When's the last time you ran that far? Well, it was 20 years ago. Okay. How much is this going to cost us? Don't worry. It's a good deal. No, that's not going to work. How much, Mike? Okay. All in to do this, it's about $25,000.
Yeah.
They're paying you or you're paying them, right? I mean, it's like, who gave you this bright idea?
Right.
This guy named Greg Godek. Well, who the hell is Greg? I just met the guy on the phone 10 minutes ago. Like, I literally could not pick this guy out of a police lineup to say this guy could have been in a phone booth in India for all I knew. He's just a voice on the other end of a phone, right? So my wife's thinking, all right, well, Mike's pretty hard-headed. If he's made up his mind, he's not changing. He's going to Antarctica. So that was the commitment to Antarctica. But of course, now it's like, well, I live in San Diego, and Angela is not going to relocate to Siberia or Canada or northern Minnesota. And that's how I ended up finding the freezer.
Now in the book, this whole conversation we're having is well detailed in the book, and there's pictures of you in the freezer training. And, I think people are drawn to the fact that you were one of the first people to do this. Right. Yet I'm not really drawn to the story because of that. I'm more drawn to how how you've taken this story and you've kind of used it to help leaders become better leaders or become better people. Right. And I noticed in the book, I wrote this down. You wrote a comment that I know you didn't finish first. Matter of fact, you finished last, I think, right? In the book. I did. But you said that that it wasn't about the winning in a practical sense. And you were trying to follow Shackleton's lead, and you weren't concerned about winning. And I think far too often in quote races, that's what we do. We compare ourselves to how we're doing in the race, and
well, that's
I think
true.
For you, it wasn't about winning. It was about following in somebody's footsteps that you had tremendous admiration for.
There's the medal.
That's the gold medal, right?
That's an Olympic gold medal, even though it represented last place out of 9 people. Yeah. I mean, the big question I got when I got back was, well, what was your time?
Oh, yeah.
Do you not
never
understand?
Asked you that.
Do you not understand? Well, runners will ask me this a lot. Like, what was your time? Do you not understand? I went to the moon, right?
Yeah.
I lived in a freezer for 2 years. I said, time, 7 hours and 15 minutes. 9 runners, 9th place, right? An hour behind the next guy.
Right.
But you know what? I felt like I won an Olympic gold medal.
Absolutely.
And the reason is because I didn't go down there to run fast. I didn't go down there to beat anybody. I went down there to struggle. Mm-hmm. Remember, I was going to walk in the shoes of my heroes. So quite frankly, the longer I'm out there and the harder it is, the more closely I'm walking in their shoes. In fact, I was actually picturing in my mind being out there for 48 hours. That was the number I had cemented in my head when I started. 48 hours, crawling on the ground, disoriented and dehydrated, not seeing another person for 2 straight days. That's kind of what I had in my mind. And then, of course, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, I kind of want that. But on the other hand, I want to come home. And I went back and forth on this.
I think go ahead. I think the misconception, Mike, for people that hear a story like this is the physical, the Rocky in the freezer, hitting the big slab of meat,
Yeah.
The mental aspect of this has to have been stronger, had to have been more impactful for you. You had to be stronger mentally, probably, or equal as physically.
Yes. I mean, physically, you kind of get into a rhythm.
Right.
And as long as you're not going too fast or too slow, you have to find sort of this optimal rhythmic zone of activity where the work doesn't feel like work. And then you can your body can get into a rhythm and you can go for a long way. But it's the mental stuff that was really hard, because when you're out there by yourself, I mean, I didn't see people for hours and hours and hours.
One amazing thing in the book you talked about that I think will put this in light. You talked about the reference. There was no reference point. And in reading your book, I thought, that is so true. If you're running on a sheet of ice and all you see is the horizon where there's just more ice, it's almost like you're running on a stationary, treadmill or something, right?
Yes. In fact, one of the nicknames of Antarctica, they call it the land of no horizon, because what happens is you picture like this hand here, my upper hand is the cloud layer and the bottom hand is the ground level. Right. Well, what happens is when the clouds come in and they meet the ground, there's no horizon. So you literally have no reference point. And it's just gray. I mean, at one point, up from down, left from right, forward from backward looked the same, like literally. Everything was just gray. and there's no mountains in the background. There's no buildings. There's no reference points. So you're going and you're going and you're going, but you have no sense of forward progress. I mean, picture the car trip when you took as a kid and you see the mountain in the out in the distance, and you look at the mountain and you go, 20 minutes we'll be there. 20 minutes later, you're not any closer than you were 20 minutes prior, right? Because the mind gets fooled. Well, when there's nothing, when there's no mountains, it's even harder. So the point is, you're exerting energy and you're using your body and you're moving and you're moving and you're moving, but you don't have any reference to the fact that you're making progress. Can you still stay the course and stay in rhythm, even when your mind is playing a different game? And that's where the mental muscles they've got to be strong. And this is why the freezer came into play so much, because the real value of the freezer had little to nothing to do with the temperature, even though it was cold.
Right.
The hard part of the freezer was 59 feet back and forth and back and forth. Like if the width of the screen was the length of the freezer, this would be 59 feet from here to here, 59. And I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I mean, forever. And people are like, you got to be out of your mind, right, to be doing this, right? Yeah. Well, I did think that until I had a flashback to 1976. Okay, I grew up in a city called Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's about an hour outside of Philadelphia. It was a Thursday night hockey practice in 1976. And one of my coaches, a guy named Ed, skated up to me and he said this, Mike, you're going to play the game the way you practice. If you make the practice harder, the game goes easier.
Right.
He skates away. And I thought to myself, that flashback came into my mind 30 years
That's a good one.
later in the freezer. And I thought to myself, well, Mike, what if you see all of this back and forth the way Ed taught you to see the hockey practice 30 years
Absolutely.
ago? Look at this. Like, if you make this harder, the game, which is the real event in Antarctica, will go easier. And it did. It really did.
Well, let me pivot a second and throw this at you, because you've got my wheels spinning here. So you know my story, and you know my why, and my why became my way. And I've used a quote that you've heard me say before: "Purpose becomes passion when it gets personal." Mm-hmm. And for me, losing a child to heroin, going on almost 5 years now, that was my why. That is the answer to every question. Jeff, why do you do this? Why do you write a book? Why do you run a nonprofit? Why do you do this? Right. That's my why. Why do you quit drinking alcohol? Why do you stop gambling? That's my why. So I'm going to ask you this question. What is your why? What drives Antarctic Mike to do the things that you do?
Well, I'll answer that question with a story. Yeah. So, about 6 years ago, I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I had a whole series of speaking engagements, like Monday through Friday. So I'm in a speaking engagement on a Monday morning, and there's a guy in the group by the name of John Strasser. John is a CEO of a Cincinnati-based construction company called Valley Interiors. So John hears me speak, and he knew I was going to be in town all week. So he says, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Can I take you to dinner?" I said, "Sure." So he says, "Stop by my office before we go out to eat, and we'll go from my office and we'll go have dinner." I said, "Sure." So I stopped by his office. Keep in mind, it's almost dark. It's 5:00 in January in Cincinnati. It's snowing. Okay, it's a dreary, snowy, cold, dark day in Cincinnati. So I go by his office, and John says, "Hey, there's 3 guys in the back room, 3 construction workers that just finished their day. They're tired, they're beat up. But can you take 10 minutes and give them an overview of what I heard today?" I said, "Sure." So I go to the back room, and I gave a 10-minute overview of what I'd spent the day on. And I didn't really think anything about it. And I didn't know who these 3 guys were. So John and I go to dinner, and the week goes on, and I come home. John calls me the following week, and he says, "You know that 10 minutes you spent with 3 of my guys?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You don't realize this, but that changed the life of one of those 3 guys." And I'm like, "Well, I have to hear this story." So he goes, "One of those 3 guys was a guy named Jared Dieselberg. Jared is a drywall I guess he specializes in ceilings. I didn't know construction guys can specialize in walls, floors, ceilings, but Jared is this guy that hangs upside down like a monkey all day on wires and ropes, and he works on ceilings. And he said it really inspired Jared. And I said, well, how did it change his life? And he said, well, Jared signed up to run what's called the Flying Pig Half Marathon. This is one of the largest half marathons in the United States. I mean, this is like 90,000 people do this. I mean, it takes over the whole city of Cincinnati for like a weekend, right? And so I said, oh, this is pretty inspiring. Can you send me his phone number? I want to call him and hear the story firsthand. He goes, sure. So he sends me his phone number and I get the guy on the phone. And Jared goes, yeah, I heard your story and I figured, you know what? If you could change your life, I could change mine.
Right.
And I said, well, how did you change your life? He said, well, I'm not really a runner. I committed to a half marathon before I even owned a pair of running shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And Jared said, I'm a little bit overweight. I'm not in very good shape. And I'm a manager, but I have a real bad temper. I'm not real patient with my guys. And he said, since I signed up for this thing, I started running. And he said, now all of a sudden I'm losing weight and I'm feeling better about myself. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. He goes, well, it doesn't stop there. Now I'm finding that I'm more patient with my crew and I'm listening to that. And I'm like, wow, okay, so now it's affecting his job.
Right.
And then he goes, it doesn't stop there. He said, now it's affecting my marriage. And I'm like, what? Now I'm really leaning in, right? And I'm like, I got to hear this one. He goes, Christina, my wife, and I have been separated for months. We haven't spoken to each other in many months. Since I started running, it gave us something to talk about because Christina likes to run. So now we're running together and we're actually talking for the first time in months. I mean, I'm on the phone, I'm crying, right? I mean, like, this is a moving story, right? So I said to Jared, I'm coming to Cincinnati. I'm going to run that Flying Pig with you and John. And I normally wouldn't go to Cincinnati to run this. So I fly to Cincinnati and Jared and I run the whole thing together, hand in hand, the entire 13 miles. And about a week after the race, Jared calls me. Christina and I have moved back in together. I mean, their relationship is now taken off again. Yeah. And Christina writes like a year in review, like on her Facebook page. And like, here are the highlights of the year. And the big highlight of that particular year was the rebuilding of her marriage with Jared. And today, to this very day, they're still married. They're friends of mine. I've met Christina since then. And, that story just reminds me of why I do what I do. I mean, it impacts people. And I get emails and phone calls and things years after the fact. Hey, that one picture you showed me, that one story you told me, I still think about it. I still use it. And I'm like, well, that's the power of a story, right? People remember stories forever and ever and ever.
All because of a 10-minute conversation you had with three people,
10 minutes, right? I mean, 10 minutes can change your life.
And if you would have been on your phone texting or, being distracted by something, you wouldn't have taken the time to do that. And there's that ripple effect. And I think, let me ask you a question in regards to the importance of goal setting. You have this audacious goal of running in Antarctic. The average person isn't going to do that. I'm breaking that to you right now, Mike. The average person isn't going to go do that.
Really?
No, you're not average.
Oh, man. I thought this was for everybody.
No. So, I mean, for the average person out there, that's probably not Antarctic Mike, but they want to have their own type of a goal, like running Antarctic. I mean, how important is it that they have achievable, attainable goals? And do you think that is what's missing in a lot of people's lives right now? And that's why we have a society that's just not very happy. We have a very depressed, anxious society. And it seems to me a lot of it's because people just are unmotivated.
Well, I think a lot of people are hitting their head on a ceiling, whether it's a self-imposed ceiling or a ceiling imposed by the media, by society, by their parents, by whoever. And I think people are banging their head on a ceiling and they're reaching very low limits. And so one of the things I know that really sort of prompted me to go to Antarctica was I thought to myself, okay, Mike, what is it that you really want to do? Right? What if you remove all the barriers and all the possibilities and all the financial constraints, just what do you really want to do? Well, I wanted to be a professional speaker. I knew that since December 16th, 1983, which is a Friday night. I mean, I know the day, the time, and the place and the setting when I made the decision. And so I knew I wanted to do that. But I think at some point you have to ask yourself the question, what is it that you really want to do? Now, at the time I made this decision, I was 40 years old. And what I pictured in my head was picture like an hourglass, that has sand in it.
Yeah.
And I pictured the amount of sand that's dropping to the bottom as being a finite amount of sand. I mean, I'm not saying it was running out today,
Right.
but clearly it was finite.
Right.
And I thought to myself, okay, there's only so much sand in the hourglass. Don't waste it, Mike, because when it's gone, it's gone. You'll never get it back. And I thought, do this now, because if I don't do it now, it never will come much too quickly. And then the circumstance will make my decision for me. Make the choice while you still can, because eventually the circumstances are going to make them for you. And they're usually not going to make the ones that you really want. So that's when I said to myself, all right, I'm going. It's now or never. And I'm doing it because I've always wanted to do this speaking thing. And I knew going to Antarctica was going to be the impetus that would really propel me. And so that's why I made that decision. And I think people have to just ask themselves the question, what is it that I really want to learn, do, or become? This is what drives human behavior.
I think for people to find something they can evolve with, something they can keep learning. I know in my case, when I lost a son and lost a marriage, all in a short amount of time span, there was a tremendous amount of chaos in my life, more in those 3-4 years than there was preceding the previous 50 combined, probably. And at a point when I should have been starting to really focus about slowing down, retirement, things like that, things that I think probably are some of the problems. Is the whole concept of retirement is a horrible idea. Personally, people think of it as slowing down, and we want to be revving things up into retirement, like you are. And me, I can't see either one of us actually. Can you see you sitting on a couch with a remote control, Mike, and watching football on a Sunday all day and eating pizza and drinking beer with your friends? I mean, I can't see me ever doing that. And I don't think I could see you.
If I win the lottery tomorrow, I'm not changing a thing.
Yeah. Well, you're probably gonna move to Antarctica, and you're probably gonna do all your speaking
buy a
up
second
there.
house there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think, you have to get to a point where you just have to figure out, do you really want to do what you want to do? Or are you going to let insecurities and fears and all these other constraints take you down a road you really don't want to go down? And then eventually one day you're going to look back on the road and you're going to go, I wish I'd taken the other one, but it's too late. It's like, I'm not going to live that way.
It's like in my book, I talk about the two roads. The day that I had to tell my other two sons, Roman and Ian, that their brother Seth was dead. I had to present it in a way that, a 13 and a 15-year-old could understand.
Sure.
And for me, I presented it as two roads, and one road of anger, despair, and hatred, and we become addicts or alcoholics and our lives unravel, or a road of inspiration and motivation. And this could be the single greatest thing that can happen to us to make us better people and those around us. I'm on the second road. I ask you to join me. And that's how I presented it. And I think if people went through their life and had, had this mindset, this living undeterred mindset, where they literally just every day see forks in the road and what's a good road, what's a bad road. As an alcoholic in the past, I even hate that term today. There's two roads. Do I have a glass of Caymus or Opus One, my two favorite Cabernets, when no one's watching and no one would know? Or do I take the road where I don't, and I know in my heart that that's the road I want to be on? And, I'm odd enough, Mike, where, I still go to restaurants, and I told this to somebody, maybe I told this to you earlier, but I still go to restaurants and I will order a glass of Cabernet, the most expensive glass I can find to make it hurt even more. And I'll put it in front of me and I won't drink it, with no intention of drinking it. And the waitress will come over and say, well, you waiting for, they're thinking maybe I got stood up on a date or something, or, and I'm like, well, that probably happens anyway.
Still sitting there, right?
Yeah. So, and I'm looking at it, and, and I just, here's my why. I put Seth's face on that glass of wine, and I will never be tempted to drink that. because I see his face looking back at me thinking, wow, Dad, what are you doing? And so I play these games with me that work well for me. And I was on a podcast the other night when I was talking to someone about some of these things that I got fairly animated about, like depression, things like that. That for me, I tried depression. I sucked at it. I didn't like it. I hated
You flunked out of that class, huh?
So I quit. I stopped being, and see, I can't understand why just people can't think that. I didn't want to drink alcohol, so I just quit. I was a compulsive gambler going to Vegas 4 or 5 times a year in my 30s. I just quit. So to me, I'm really perplexed in why more people out there, and maybe there are, Mike, they just haven't found their why. And I kind of think if you and I can get conversations going, and somebody's now sitting around going, well, I haven't lost a child, so I can't really relate to Jeff. And, I didn't lose a marriage. I don't have cancer or anything like that. Yeah. But man, here's a guy that, just ran you ran a 62.1 mile ultra marathon. Mm-hmm. I mean, come on, man. I'm getting my ass off the couch. I'm going to run that 45 minutes on my elliptical, and I'm going to feel like Antarctic Mike, And I guess these are the stories that people need to hear, in the face of adversity, when against all odds, kind of like Rocky, do we get up? Do we fight? Or do we go to the bottle? Do we get drunk every night? Do we lose everything around us? What are some things we can do individually? If I better myself, Mike, my coworkers are better. My parents are better. My kids are better. My neighbors are better. But if I don't take care of myself, then everything else around me crumbles.
Yeah.
And that's the collateral damage with all this stuff going on, with all the problems people are having, is they don't realize how many people they're sucking into that black hole with you. And, hopefully you and I can talk about these things and get people to make some changes to change. The last thing I'll say, I know you want to say something. I've learned over my years of giving financial advice and just dealing with behavioral finance, mm-hmm. or economics, let's call it. There's 2 ways to change behavior. And you hit on this a few minutes ago. You inspire people or you scare them. And when someone comes to you and says, Mike, you have cancer. If you don't stop smoking, you're going to die. That's not inspiration. That's right. Fear. I don't want to die.
Correct.
But if someone says, hey, Ernest Shackleton, 100 years before you, or whatever that was, a long time ago, mm-hmm. Went up and did all this stuff. And you're like, well, hell, I want to go do that too. That's right. That's not something motivation out of fear. That's mm-hmm. motivation out of inspiration.
Correct.
So that's how you change behavior. You either have to scare people or motivate them. And I'd much rather spend my life inspiring people.
Well, it's like my friend Mark Braun from Cambridge in St. Louis says, people do everything in their life out of one of 2 modes, love and fear. Mm-hmm. Those are the 2 modes.
Right.
And, I just operate out of the mode of, what do I really like to do? The other thing that goes in my mind consciously is, how can I make an impact on other people?
Right.
Because I really believe that we were all created and put here, not just to take care of ourselves, but to take mm-hmm. care of others. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to ask ourselves the question, look, we only have so much time mm-hmm. and so many talents that we can put forth. And obviously we have to be responsible and take care. I mean, look, we all have to live in a house and turn the water on and do the thing, go to the doctor and do the things that we do. Okay, we get that. But beyond that, right, we got to start thinking about, how can we use our efforts to help other people mm-hmm. and make the most impact on other people. And I knew that my efforts, I was a corporate recruiter forever and ever and ever. And yes, it paid the bills and it allowed me to take care of Angela and I, but it made minimal impact on other people. I knew that going out and telling stories the way I could, I knew it would inspire people like Jared and others to make changes in their life. And I knew that. And that was part of what really fueled me to say, it's time to jump off the cliff. Half of it was, what is it that I really want to do? And the other half was, how can I impact people the most? And I think those 2 things just gave me the courage to kind of jump off the cliff, so to speak, and say, it's time to work for myself. It's time to create my own stories and do my own thing.
Now, you had mentioned to me earlier, and you don't have to get too deep into this, about a personal thing that had happened with a fall. And maybe that was the impetus to some of the why that you have. And you realize the impermanence the concept of impermanence, that, hey, any moment, someone I really care about could die for a million different causes. And I think that embracing impermanence is something I'm really trying to promote heavily. And I know when you and I talked, you had talked about some things in your personal life that I think maybe literally clicked a light on. You talked about coming back and having your place dark. And
I'll tell you the story.
Do you mind sharing that? Because I didn't know how comfortable you weren't sharing.
No, that's okay. No, so I mean, I'm writing about it in the book I'm about to print. So okay. It's going to go to the world here pretty soon anyway. No, and I'm comfortable telling it. And I tell this story in every one of my speaking engagements. So the question is, why did I go to Antarctica? It's been now, what is this, 2021? It's been 16 years since I've been. So, why did you really go to Antarctica? And I think, well, didn't I go because I wanted to run in this first ever Antarctic ice marathon? Well, yeah, that was part of it. Didn't you go because you wanted to walk in the shoes of your hero, Ernest Shackleton? Well, yeah, I did. But I didn't know the answer to the question, why did I really go? Until December 24th of 2018. What happened was Angela was in the hospital. She had a rock climbing accident in college, and she broke nearly every bone in her body. And when I start the speaking engagement, I say, that's why I went to Antarctica. And of course, people are sitting on the edge of their chair like, what does that have to do with Antarctica, right? Well, I'm going to get to that. And you'll know by right. Just give me about an hour and you'll know the answer. So the answer is she was in the hospital, and I had spent the day with her in the hospital, and now it's 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and it's time to come home, right? She's tired. I'm tired. The day's over. So I come home to my house. We don't have kids. So I walk in the house. There's no lights on in the house. It's like pitch black, and it's really quiet, like so quiet. The silence was screaming. And I'm standing there in the dark and in the quiet, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, when this episode is all over, is she coming home with or without me? For the first time in 30 years, I doubted whether or not she'd ever be able to come home. And I thought to myself, Shackleton must have felt like this during part of that 2 years. They were down there for 2 years, stranded, when I'm sure their life was flashing before their eyes many times. And I thought, he must have been in situations like this. And I thought to myself, how did he get through this? Then I remembered something Shackleton said when he got back from being stranded for 2 years. He said, we had seen God in his splendors. We heard the text that nature renders. We had reached the naked soul of man. And I thought to myself, what did he mean by the naked soul of man? I mean, besides being like the coolest title for a book you could ever write, right? Absolutely. I mean, seriously, like you'd pick that book up. What did he mean by that? He must have meant that's got to be the place in life where you're stuck and you're alone. There's nobody around you. And difficulty is everywhere on all sides of you. And it's just caving in from every angle. And there's very little you can do. And I thought, he must have been in that situation many times. Well, how did he get through it? Then I remembered this picture. This is the most powerful picture from Shackleton's story. When that ship was stuck in the ice. Yeah. Okay, he taught his guys to mentally let go of the things they have no control over, and focus on what they do. This is a very powerful picture.
And they're playing soccer there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Makes sense. They're from England. He said, okay, he taught these guys to let go. And I thought, okay, he let go. Then I thought to myself, well, what would Shackleton say to me if he were standing here in my house? Then I heard his voice. He said, let Angela go. And I'm like, let her go? What do you mean let her go? How am I going to do this? Angela is the first and only person in my whole life in 56 years that I've ever dated. What do you mean let her go? He said, Mike, just let her go, meaning just let God handle this. No matter what the outcome, right, you're going to be okay. And emotionally, I kind of let her go. Well, fortunately, she made it through that episode and came home. But I thought to myself, well, maybe that's why you really went to Antarctica, Mike. Maybe you didn't just go to run in this first ever Antarctic ice marathon.
Yeah.
Maybe you didn't just go to walk in the shoes of your hero. Maybe you didn't just go to Antarctica because you got some screws loose in your head. You did, and you still do. That's not different. Maybe you went to Antarctica to learn to let go of the most important people in the hardest moments of your life. I think about you and your son, Seth, and I thought, well, Jeff let Seth go.
Yeah.
I mean, and boy, and it's hard. I mean, like you say, pain is unavoidable. The pain of that situation is unavoidable, but the suffering is a choice, right? You're obviously not suffering from that. I am not suffering through. I mean, Anz and I have been through so many circumstances. I mean, holy cow, you could write a novel on just that alone. But just the difficulty of letting go of somebody. And I just really see now, Angela and I have been together for 31 years. And I'm like, okay, look, I know nothing lasts forever. And there's never going to be a day that's the right time, right? There's never enough time. But realistically, I feel like I'm more prepared for difficult moments that are coming around the corner. And I'm sure you probably feel the same way, right? Life is nothing other than a series of blind corners, right? We know that. And around the corner, man, you can get hit by a train. You know, I've been in that situation many times. You've been in that situation. Our viewers have been in that situation or will be in that situation. But you've got to be prepared for those moments. And I feel like all the stuff from Antarctica is what prepared me. You can put that right there. Thank you.
So I think in a way you did find your why. And it's normally deeper than what you think for most of us. And I'm still not convinced that I know 100% my why just yet. I mean, I have an easy excuse for a why, and that's what I went through, you know. But the reality is, I think it's deeper than that. I think I'm on some quest where I'm trying to take conventional beliefs that I have, you know, the most immovable objects in my life, my strongest convictions that I have, but then challenge them, and then rewrite them, and challenge them and rewrite them. And, you know, and there's so many things in your book that I kept reading going, wow, I've not done what Mike has done. And I certainly hadn't done what Shackleton's done, but I'm doing some things right now that I can definitely relate to what I'm going through. And I know there's people watching this right now that are either at the beginning of some type of a journey of exploration, or they're in the middle of one, or they just finished one and now they're ready to start another one. That's the other thing I think, Mike, I was going to ask you is what's next for Antarctic Mike? I mean, I would say, I would never ask you how long it took you to run it. I would just say, okay, what's next? You know?
Yeah, that's a very common, that's obviously a very common question.
I know you're coming to Iowa. And I got some cornfields here you can run in if you want, you know?
Well, that's a good question. And that's a fair question that people ask me a lot, you know, what's next? Like I have to do some other stupid human trick that's bigger and faster and more dangerous, right? Well, I mean, first of all, I realize the human body has limits. And realistically, my days of marathons and those conditions, realistically, they're done because I'd like to save knees, shoulders, and hips for a few more years, right? I don't want to spend them prematurely. But so I do, you know, I've really backed off physically. But I think really more of what's next. Really, your story is an example. I mean, last year, 2020, I really made the decision that what was next for me was to help other people tell their story. I made a very conscious decision last year to do this because I had just finished a documentary film about a construction company story in Las Vegas. That's a really, really good story. And it was very satisfying helping these people tell their story. And I thought, well, I'm pretty good at this and I like this, so I'm going to keep doing this. And I shot another one in Myrtle Beach about a month ago, and it's just getting finished now. And I'm coming to Iowa, obviously, next month, and we're going to tell your story. And then there's a whole bunch of others that I have behind that I'm constantly working on that are great stories that I want to help other people tell their story. So for me, that's really what's next. My goal is to spend 90% of my time and earn 90% of my income only from helping other people tell their story. Keynote speaking will be like the, oh, by the way. I will do that realistically maybe twice a month. Really. I don't want to run from stage to stage to stage to stage. I just don't want to do that. I want to spend more time with people like you and other corporations, helping them tell their story, because they need help, and I know how to do it. And it's a big inspiration to viewers. And these are great stories that will change the lives of people forever and ever and ever.
So I was, I've started the Living Undeterred project. For me has been about 6 months roughly. And that's kind of how long I've been doing it. And in that time frame, I've run across a lot of people that have kind of approached me. Hey, Jeff, you should subscribe to our blah, blah, blah. We can get your story out to a lot of people, blah, blah, blah.
Of course.
I met you, and after about, I don't know, 4 or 5 conversations that we had, I didn't know what the hell you did. I'm like, I know this guy ran in Antarctica. Why is he talking to me for an hour? And he's asking so many questions about my story. And I had to go to your profile and look, and I'm not really sure what this guy does. So I think during one of our conversations, I just said, I think I said something like, "Hey, Mike, I want to hire you."
You did.
Like, do you mind sharing that story real quick? Because
this was funny. This was funny,
fell
right?
out of my chair.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell the viewers. During the last year, right, I've met a lot of people like Jeff right here, through Zoom calls and StreamYard calls, because this is how we've been forced by the virus, right? So I meet all these people, and I'm just a big fan of these stories. And some of these stories that are out there are great. So the impetus for us was, you were on a conversation somewhere, I think it was on LinkedIn, and there was a reference to the fact that you lost a son. And I'm like, I have to hear this one. So that's when I probably reached out and said, "Hey, I'd love to hear your story." And you're like, "Sure, come on down." So that's when we Zoomed, right? And I came into your living room and you came into mine, and here we were, and you told me the story, and I'm like, wow, the world should know this one, right? So that just sparked, plus, the Iron Maiden banner that I see behind you there. And I'm like, okay, I knew we were going to be good friends, because, we just have a lot in common. And so that was kind of the impetus. And you're right. And then that time I was in South Carolina. I'll never forget this. I spent the day at a corporation in Pawleys Island. It was a long day. I'd just driven several hours, and I got back to my hotel, and it was about 7:00 at night. And you're like, "Hey, let's jump on Zoom." And I'm like, okay. Hadn't even gone to the bathroom or eaten dinner. And I jump on Zoom with you. And one of the first things you say to me was, "Okay, I've made a decision." And I'm like, "Well, what's your decision?" And you're like, "I'm going to hire you." And I'm thinking, I don't drive people to the airport. What do you mean you're going to hire me, right? And you said,
I'm a little impulsive.
And you said, "I'm going to hire you to put my story on video." Right. And I remember saying to you, "Well, listen, I'm flattered. Why did you pick me?" Here's exactly what you said. "Because you didn't push, you didn't ask, you didn't even tell me what you did for a living." And I said, "Well, what did I do?" And you just paused for a minute and you said, "You listened." Yeah. And that's when I wrote down the title of the next book I'm going to write. Don't push, don't ask, don't tell, don't sell. Simply listen, ... for the sake of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought, how many salespeople would get so much further ahead if that's what they did? Right. The answer is a lot, right?
Right.
Because most of these clowns out there, and you've seen these people, they push and they push, and they're selling and yelling and screaming, and they're putting brochures and bullet points and what in front of people. And it's like, people don't want that stuff. Yeah. I think what happened was, I think the way I conducted myself, I think what you saw a reflection, I think, of what you want to become more like. And I think you also saw a reflection of somebody you can trust. Because when people are doing this, you can't trust that, right? That's a reason to not trust people. But when they start going like this, you can trust them when they're backing off of you and they're not pushing anything. That's when you go, "Hey, I kind of like that guy. I like that gal. That's somebody I can trust." Because the issue at hand is, can I trust you? Right. I mean, we could go on and on about. Well,
you had a genuine interest in, the challenges I had, and maybe you were equating them to Shackleton's journey and all these different analogies that you could use with these stories. And so, I at sometimes during this journey, I get concerned that I'm bringing up losing a child too frequently to make a point. And I have to set that aside. I have to set that aside and say, for me to really make an impact for people in their lives, to make changes, to inspire them to change behavior, whether it's to quit drinking, to, resolve a relationship, bury the hatchet, move on, live a life of impermanence that things are going to be coming to an end. It really forced me to become vulnerable. And I mean, open my chest up vulnerable.
Right. Exactly.
And do it on a daily basis, just day in and day out. And my blogs just are full of tears. My blogs are full of joy, and my podcasts are meeting people that I don't have an agenda. I've never made a penny off of anything I've done on this project. Everything I've made has gone in my nonprofit, which our plan is to get that dispersed as grants, to allow me to go and maybe speak and things like that, which, I would love that environment. I like public speaking. I feel like if the moment I stop talking about Seth, he truly dies. And that was an important part of my book, that I did not want to ever stop talking about him. And I run the risk of talking about him too much, where I can walk into a room and people say, well, here comes Jeff. He's going to start talking about his child again that passed away. You know what? I guess I need to be aware of that. But at the same token, the moment I stop talking about him, then he really does die. I mean, who else is out there, talking about him like this? And I'm not doing that to be disparaging to other people in his family, but I mean, most times when someone dies, you go to the funeral, you do your condolences, and you kind of go back to your own life. You go back to your kids and your and you just kind of move on until what? Until something happens in your life that's personal. Until you lose a child, or you have an alcohol problem in your family, or your parents die, or your spouse has cancer. Until it becomes personal, then you get re-engaged again. I'm just trying to get people to say, why do we have to wait for something to become personal to get engaged in things that we should be doing anyway? Well,
the issue about somebody saying, what, that guy he's just using his dead son's story as gain for himself. Right?
I've heard that.
I understand that. And I've heard the same thing about Angela. He's just talking about Angela. He's using her, that kind of thing. He's looking for sympathy, right? That kind of thing. Well, I could tell the story and be guilty of that, but I could also tell the story and not be guilty of that, right? It depends on why you're telling the story is the big thing. And I know you well enough to know, every time you've said anything about your son, Seth, I know it's only been for my gain, not yours. I know that, because there's been a lesson, right? And the lesson in your case is choose the road called better, not bitter, right? Because at the intersection, right, where the Y starts, that's called disaster, right? That's called trauma. That's called difficulty. And it's in varying degrees and colors. But guess what? Everybody gets to that fork in the road. Everybody's already been there, and we're going to continue to be there. The only question is, which road are we going to pick? That's the only question. And I think the whole impetus behind any time you even mention your son's name is to help people make a better choice. And I know that about you. And that's why I just don't think you're going to have very many people that are going to try and label you in that regard. Now, is there going to always be somebody in a large crowd at the end of the spectrum? Of course. But you know what? You'll never be able to help that guy. And just let that guy go. Just let him go. That's not your audience. You can't ever help that guy. Well, that's okay. Because there's a lot of people in the middle of the bell curve that will go, that was inspiring. Thank you for being so open. I wish I had that kind of courage to be open. And they will have that much courage because they'll see somebody like you and they'll go, hey, if he can open up, then I can open up too.
Yeah. And then, I didn't plan on talking about my compulsive gambling problem I had in my 30s. As a financial planner, that's probably not something you go out and put on your resume. I didn't.
FINRA wouldn't like that one, would they?
No, but I don't care now because I'm not anymore. But and I had a massive drinking problem. I was a functional alcoholic until December 24th, 2017, 14 months after Seth died, and I quit. And quitting alcohol was the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. Once I found my why, and that's the whole key. And I get into healthy debates. I don't argue with people ever.
Right.
I get into healthy debates about alcoholism, and people that want to subscribe to disease and they're werewolves and they're cursed and all that. That's fine, and I hope that mindset helps you give up drinking. But if it doesn't, and you believe in these things and it's not working, then why not add another arrow to your quiver? And that's what I'm all about, is adding tools to get people deal with adversity. So, I think, but I'd like to just add, Mike, to kind of wrap this up. I mean, we are at an hour and 5 minutes, which has been awesome. And I don't really have a time frame with these
Seems
things.
Like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
like
I
5
know.
minutes.
But you and I have talked longer on the phone. So, just to let people know, I am going to have you come out to Iowa here shortly, and we're going to be putting together, I don't know what you call it, a mini, I say the word documentary, but that sounds so archaic, but a story. I mean, you're a tremendous storyteller. And I think one time someone asked me, and I even wrote a blog on this, they said, Jeff, what are you? Are you a motivational coach? Are you a life coach? Are you a theologian? Are you a clinical practitioner? And I'm like, no, I'm a dad. I'm a neighbor. I'm a voter. I'm a friend. But what I am is a storyteller. That's what I am. And all the other stuff is fluff to me. I don't know a lot about the other stuff to say I'm an expert in anything. And so for you, that was the attraction, is like, I think you and I together as two storytellers, obviously you have to make a living. I understand that. And ultimately down the road, I got to find a way. I can't be footing the bill for all this forever. I mean, at some point, my nonprofit's got to have to start making money,
of course
or
it does.
Or nonprofits go out of business.
Correct.
And then I can't help people. So there's that dichotomy there. But it's like you and I together telling a story for 2 or 3 minutes, a powerful story that now I can get out there and send to high schools, send to colleges, send to organizations that talk to kids. And I can get in, and I can get into kids before the age of first use. That 14 to 16 is the sweet spot, Mike, where I think we can help kids. I'm fairly certain that Jeff Johnston isn't going to save a 38-year-old alcoholic mom drinking 2 bottles of white wine, a night. I don't think I'm going to help that person. I don't know if I have the patience. I don't have the desire, but I do for the kids. I do for the kids. I do to get in to see the sets of the world at 14 years old, and not to tell them what not to do, but teach them how to think, how to make better choices. And that is what I want to do for the rest of my life. That's what I want to do. And I welcome you on my journey. And I'm so excited to get this project done, because I have a feeling this is one of many projects that we'll be working together on.
Well, one thing you don't know about my upcoming trip to Iowa, I had a conversation this morning with a videographer who's in Des Moines, and I got referred to him by a Vistage guy that I'm very good friends with in Des Moines. And so I talked to this guy named Andrew for a while, and it turns out he's not going to be available to do our shoot because he's got some other commitments. But he referred me to 2 other guys, and one of these guys is producing some mini series for Netflix. And the light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, just maybe, if we do this right, this little 2.5, 3 minute thing that we're going to create could become possibly the impetus to spark an interest in a mini series. I mean, there's enough content in your story, when you look at it metaphorically, to talk about the road of better versus bitter over financial issues, health issues, marital issues, child raising issues. There's a million applications. What if there was a 5-part, and I'm just thinking out loud. A 5-part miniseries. And let's say each series was 15 minutes, right? It's not a huge commitment. 15-minute story about better versus bitter financially, maritally, child, whatever the case is. Okay. And each of those 5-part series, let's say Netflix charges 99 cents per each one, right? People will pay 99 cents, right? I mean, that's not unreasonable.
Yeah.
So somebody's going to pay 99 cents. Well, let's suppose hypothetically Netflix invests $500,000 in this, just to use a number, $500,000. Well, how many 99-cent clicks is it going to take to get their money back?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot relative to the population base of their subscriber base, right? And I'm thinking to myself, if there's ever been a time when people need to be inspired and encouraged to choose better versus bitter, it's now. It's now.
And I think you said the other day, it's not just an opioid epidemic conversation.
No.
As a matter of fact, I spend more time on talking about alcoholism and suicidal ideation and things that are under the mental health umbrella. And I'm fairly convinced, Mike, that Seth had mental health issues. Now, he was labeled ADD, as you and I both have ADD. If you've never been diagnosed, I'll diagnose you, Mike. You have ADD.
Okay.
It's a superpower. It's a superpower. But it's like, I think the problem is that people hear my story and they think it's limited to the opioid epidemic. And granted, 80,000. When Seth died, it was 55,000 in our country died of opioid overdoses. This year, they're predicting it year over year to be close to 80,000. That has to stop. At some point, we got to get this curve going the other direction. So I think by telling these stories, meeting other dads like Steve Grant, who's become a good friend of mine,
right.
He lost Chris and Kelly, his only 2 boys, only 2. I lost one of my 3. I can't even imagine losing 2 of your only 2. Right. And so here's a gentleman that raised $1 million. His story needs to be told. And so there's so many people that are jumping on this living undeterred, wagon that we're just rolling around, meeting people every day. And it's like, at some point, I'm fairly confident that we're going to be reaching a lot of people, and a lot of people are going to be changing their lives for the better. And
it's not drugs versus no. The issue is not drugs. It's not about drugs.
Right. I agree.
Just like in our society today, it's not Biden versus Trump. It's not black versus white.
Right.
It's not any of that stuff.
Right.
It goes back to what my friend Mark Braun said. It's love or fear. Yeah. So when you look at the world in front of us and you look at the drug overdoses and the riots and the violence and the black versus white and all this and stuff you see out there in the world, obviously that's not love, right? You can figure that out. So what is it? It's fear. Right. And you know what people fear the most? Taking off the mask that they're wearing. Mm-hmm. People spend their whole life building a mask, and the mask looks pretty. The mask is made up of school degrees and families and businesses and accomplishments cars and boats and cars and healthy families and, 2 kids that don't have any problems and get A's in school. That's the mask. Right. But yet that's not reality. Reality is what's behind the mask. And what's behind the mask is fear, insecurity, and falling short. Right. And I think what people really want in their lives, people really don't want the mask. The irony is they spend their whole life building this mask. Right. But what they really want is they want to take it off. Right. And some people just don't have the courage to take it off. And I think this is where God comes into the picture. If you don't have the courage to take it off, he'll take it off. I mean, in some way, the mask is going to come off. And, that's really when you're at that intersection called the naked soul of man. It's like living your life without the mask. That's really what the naked soul of man is, because that's who I really am. Mm-hmm. And I think that people want to be accepted for who they are without the mask. And I think if the world understands how to help people in that regard, that's how we're going to start solving the problems. It's not this law versus that law and this gun or not that gun. That's not the issue. Whether you believe in that stuff or not is not the point, right? The point is, the issue is, do people feel accepted without their mask? And I think stories like yours help people to see, I can have the courage to take my mask off. I can have the courage to remove the facade. I guess I have to, the word mask today is little relative, since we've all basically been wearing one for a year and a half, right? I'm not talking about this. Right. I'm talking about the facade, right, that people put up. But, it'd be, I can see this miniseries in my head, and I can see a Netflix or an Amazon Prime. I can see them saying, I want to meet these characters. I want to hear more about this. And I'm happy you said characters, because there's so many people out there that have similar, more compelling stories, maybe different types of stories unique to them, that, that this is the reason why the Living Undeterred podcast idea came to fruition. Was I wanted to talk to these people. I wanted to go out and meet them, and I wanted other people to be a fly on the wall, because you and I can sit on the phone and talk, and it's just you and I, we hang up and then we go on. But a conversation like this, someone right now could be watching this when we do run this in a few weeks, and they could see the end of this and go, wow, this was, I need to make changes in my life, or I could end up making choices like Seth made, or I something else could happen to me that my life would spiral out of control. So,
Any last words of wisdom you want to throw out there, and then we'll wrap this up? And by the way, I wanted to tell you that we just got done doing our first ever charity golf outing, and that's the sign over here. This last weekend, we raised $25,000.
Wow.
In 4 months, we did this in 4 months, and Molly had a lot to do with it. Molly Nordlocken runs everything in my life, but $25,000 in a year where we have, COVID has killed small businesses around the country. The derecho in Cedar Rapids, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but when you get here, you'll find out. The derecho was the worst winds we've ever had through Cedar Rapids, non-tornado related winds. These were 200-mile-an-hour hurricane winds for 45 minutes, and it destroyed Cedar Rapids.
When was that?
Last August. And
really?
And so we have businesses that donated that haven't got their insurance checks yet, that donated $50 gift certificates. And I mean, it's a tremendous story of the love of the community and how they just jumped on the back of my story, which is it's a story, but some of these people probably aren't making any money, even feed their own families. So here they are giving $50 donations to a nonprofit, to a kid they never met, to benefit somebody they never met. And so Cedar Rapids deserves a round of applause. The people of Iowa are awesome. You told me in all your travels, and I'm pretty sure you weren't sugarcoating this, you told me Iowa is your favorite state.
People ask me this question a lot. Where's your favorite place to go? And I've been everywhere, right? All 50 states.
You've been to Antarctica.
I've been all over, exactly. Europe, Asia, South America. And the answer shocks people. Iowa. And they look at me like, what's wrong with you, right? Because I think they expect me to say New York or Seattle or Miami, right? Or some London, England, or some glamorous city. And of course, the next question is, why?
Yeah, potatoes, right? We have potatoes. Wait a minute, that's Idaho.
No, here's the answer. Because in the middle of the country, in the smallest cities like Nottoway, Iowa, Stewart, Iowa, Atlantic, Iowa, these are towns of 35 people at best on a good day. These are the nicest people in the world. These are people that live with what I call an unlocked door mindset, where they're just an open book. They trust people. Yeah. They're not pretentious. They're not materialistic. They're just regular people that get up and go to work and feed their kids and send their kids to school. And I mean, I think they are a picture of what most people want to be like. I think most people do not want to be hung up on, am I driving the right Mercedes? Am I buying the clothes at the right place? And I don't think people really want to get hung up on that, even though they are. I think they see the picture of the people that aren't, and they go, I wish I was more like that guy.
It's funny you say that. I was listening to Joe Rogan the other day, and he had Dan Gable on, and Dan Gable's a famous wrestling icon in the world of wrestling. And one of the guys that came out that stayed with Dan and did a lot of the video and stuff, and had him on his podcast to helping videotape this stuff. Actually, he was on Joe Rogan's show, but it wasn't Joe's podcast. It was a different guy. He said of all the places he's ever been, he never felt more at home, more welcome the week he spent at the Gables. And just being around Iowans and just walking into restaurants. And even though he was with Dan Gable, that probably didn't hurt any. But the fact is that the people of Iowa, and there's a reason why I raised $25,000 in 4 months, Mike.
Right.
At $25 a time, $50 a time. That's a lot of people that donated money. So, hey, listen, brother, I'm going to see you on our live stream we have coming up. So when this runs, our live stream will actually be over. Right. And so for those people who haven't known about you, they will on the live stream. But I do want to recommend that if people want to support, I know people have given financially to my nonprofit, the Choices Network. I know people have bought the book, and that helps my nonprofit as well. But one way you can help is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to do a much better. I'm not a salesman when it comes to this stuff, Mike. I don't understand clicks, likes, and follows. I just create content, and how it gets out there, I don't know. But I'm told to tell people that make sure if they think this stuff's beneficial, if they want to help my cause, they need to go make comments, do the Google reviews, whatever that's called, do the 5-star ratings, do the subscriptions on YouTube, do all the things that the big people, the corporate people, the LinkedIns of the world can start to see people getting on board this project, and we can start to do more good for more people.
And one more thing, send it to your network. If you like it, share it. right? That helps a lot. That's how you get to, you say, how do these stories get to 40 million views? You're not reaching 40 million people.
Right.
You're reaching 10 people that send it to 10, that send it to 10, and you follow me, right? And all of a sudden, you're at 40 million in a hurry. So send it to other people that you know.
Well, listen, I love you, brother. Really enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm looking really forward to having you come out here to Iowa and meet some of the people that I run circles with every day. So
I always welcome a chance to get back to my favorite of all 50 states. This is going to be a vacation, even though it's work.
normally I end every show with reminding the listeners and reminding my guests to always live undeterred. But with you, man, I don't think I have to remind you. I don't think I have to remind you to keep living undeterred. You're doing a pretty good job yourself. So,
well, thank you.
Have a great night. Appreciate your friendship and your support.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Hope I can help your viewers.